The Roaring Night group chat is definitely one of the most engaging and divisive topics for theorization in the Deltarune community ever since chapters 3 and 4 came out. There is definitely a conspiracy of some kind happening here, but who's working with whom, who's the mastermind behind everything, and is Papyrus the Knight? The most common consensus is that Chris, Carolholiday, and the Knight are all working together in a clear-cut alliance, and that Asgore is probably in on it, and other characters like Alvin are possibly in on it. While I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of this interpretation, or I don't think it's impossible, I think some points used to back it up aren't as solid as people think, and I want to dismantle them a little bit because I think there are other possibilities that we can't quite rule out. And what I'll be focusing on in this video are the mysterious phone calls that Chris has at several points during chapter 4 in the holiday house and in their room at the end of the chapter. Namely, who is this caller and why is it not Carolholiday? Most people look at a few pieces of evidence pointing towards the caller being Carol and assume this is 100% confirmation that Carol is behind the calls, and then build their case off of this assumption, but the assumption, I believe, is incorrect. These presumably rock-solid points can be argued against and, in my opinion, quite likely disproven. First of all, let's get the obvious out of the way. Whoever is on the phone here is clearly not just a normal person calling from a normal setting with no gastery bullshit whatsoever going on. The text bubble is sharply shaped and solid black, like the Knight. There's this ominous sounding sound effect whenever they talk, and the text is all weird. So why would Carol talk like this, especially since in the weird route Chris receives a call from Carol instead of whoever this person is, and she talks normally? People look at this and arrive at one of two possible conclusions. Either Carol has to be on everything because she's somehow calling from inside a dark world or something, or she's the Roaring Knight herself. What I don't get is what in the weird route would cause her to call normally if the rest of the time she's calling from the Shadow Realm. I think these conclusions that people draw are an intentional result of red herrings meant to make us think that Carol is the Knight, and the best example of this is the point that Carol caller defenders often see as irrefutable proof of their theory, and that's right here with this call, where the person on the other end of the line is told about Susie having Des's guitar and tells Chris, "I'll be right there," before hanging up. Moments later, Carol of course arrives at the holiday house, so clearly the caller has to be Carol if they're saying, "I'll be right here," and then Carol immediately shows up at the house. Well, I definitely think you're meant to think that, but as I personally believe that the caller is the Knight, but also that Carol is not the Knight, I think there has to be another explanation for this line, and lo and behold, there actually is. The "I'll be right there" line isn't just followed up by Carol showing up, but also by the church dark fountain being open. "I'll be right there" isn't Carol saying she'll be home soon, but the Knight telling Chris that they'll shortly be at the church to open the fountain, because for whatever reason Susie having the guitar means they need to hurry up with their plan. Now, if you believe this much, then you might assume that Carol shows up because the Knight sends her to stop Susie, and therefore this proves that Carol is working with the Knight and Chris. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. This is where I start to lose some of you, because surely there's no way Carol just coincidentally happens to show up right at this perfect moment after this phone call that heavily suggests that she's aware of what Chris is saying to the caller, at least. Well, what if I told you there was a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why Carol shows up at the house? Now, full credit for this discovery goes to Neobind on Discord. I did not make this connection myself, shout out Neobind, but if you recall, during the Spampton sweepstakes we got to see Noelle's blog, where one particular post from her is very, very interesting. In this post, Noelle talks about her mother being particularly neurotic about rain, to the point that she's ordered the school to be closed down before due to it raining. And what do we find when we step out of the holiday house right after the confrontation with Carol? It's raining. At some point during our visit, it started raining outside, And remember, in chapter 1 we find out that Noelle regularly gets locked out of the house while Carol is at work. So it started raining. Carol realized Noelle could be stuck outside, which normally wouldn't be that big a deal to her, but because rain is like the coming of the apocalypse to her, she rushed back home to make sure Noelle could get in the process stumbling upon Susie with Des's guitar, which upset her either because she knows the code is in there and doesn't want Susie to have it, or, what I think is the more likely explanation, she's just grieving her daughter and doesn't want a stranger she's probably heard very unfavorable things about fucking around with Des's things, which I think is actually quite reasonable. I mean, really, why would we even get this post in the first place, which has this seemingly random detail about Carol not liking rain and closing the school down because of it, if it wasn't meant to direct our attention to this scene where it is raining. But if Carol isn't the caller, and the Knight and Chris's apparent conspiracy doesn't even necessarily involve her, then what exactly is Carol up to? What's her role in the story apart from just being a red herring? Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this and a more elaborate and convoluted theory related to it, but I think I'll save that for a separate video. As for now, thanks for watching. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time with why Carolholiday actually did nothing wrong and is completely innocent. Peace.